Just to let you know, this episode deals with themes of grief and loss. Welcome to Filmability. My name is Joel Fisher, and I'm the author of Filmability, A History of Disability in Cinema, which you can find on Amazon and Kindle paperback. Welcome if this is your first time listening. Welcome back if you listened before. Remember, you can find me wherever you get your podcasts, so don't forget to share, like, subscribe, comment, and all that good stuff. This week I'll be talking about The Horse Whisperer, a 1998 Oscar-winning film about a girl who loses a leg in a horse riding accident and how a man who works with horses helps her to heal. The Horse Whisperer is directed by Robert Redford, a legendary actor and director who starred in such films as Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, All the President's Men, The Sting, The Way We Were, and many more. As a director, he also directed A River Runs Through It, with Brad Pitt and Brent Bethan, and The Legend of Bag of Ants, with Will Smith and Matt Damon. Eric Roth and Richard Ligavreness also wrote the screenplay, adapted from the novel of the same name by Nicholas Evans. Eric Roth is best known for writing the screenplay for Forrest Gump, Curious Case of Benjamin Button, The Good Shepherd, and Dune Part 1. Richard Ligavreness is also best known for writing screenplays for The Fisher King, The Bridges of Madison County, and Freedom Writers. As usual, if you'd like to watch The Horse Whisperer before continuing with the podcast, I suggest you do so now, as I will be spoiling everything. You can find The Horse Whisperer on Disney Plus and everywhere else to buy or rent in digital or physical form. So without further ado, let's go on with the film. Okay, so the film starts out with images of a horse running through the sand at night. It's a really beautiful shot, a great way to open the film. And there's a little girl riding the horse and she's laughing. This little girl wakes up and she gets out of bed and she looks out the window at the snow-covered area around her house. She picks up her wellies and goes to see if her parents are asleep. They are, so she goes and gets dressed and goes outside, and this is Grace, and she's played by Scarlett Johansson. Inside, her mother is making some coffee and going through the day's newspapers. She finds an article claiming that she misled somebody in her work, and she gets angry. This is Annie, and she's played by Kristen Scott Thomas. Outside, Grace meets her friend, and she asks where Annie is. Grace says that she's working, and then they go to some horse stables, and Grace goes inside, putting a saddle on the horse and going out of the stables. Grace's friend is called Judith, and she's played by Kate Bosworth. At a magazine office, Annie sits down at her desk and looks at the pictures of her family. She calls her husband and she says that she's taking a cab home and asks about Grace. He tells her that she's gone riding. Her husband is called Robert, and he's played by Sam Neill. She gets a call and she says that she's suing the people who put the article in the paper that made false claims against her. Outside, Grace and Judith are riding in the snow, and it cuts between Annie at work and the horses. Grace and Judith start singing, and the horses are struggling a bit on the snowy surface. They collide, and Judith falls off her horse, and they both slide down the hill. Grace has fallen as well, and she's got her foot trapped in one of the stirrups. And then a truck comes along, and it hits them both, and it kills Judith. At the hospital, Robert tells Annie that Judith is dead, and that they have to remove Grace's right leg. The scene then cuts back to the accident where the horse is found wounded and frightened under a bridge. Some people try to approach it, but it runs away. At hospital, Grace wakes up, and parents are there. Annie asks the nurse for some help, and it seems like she wants to take over. The nurse says that Grace needs rest, and that they should come back in a couple of hours. Another nurse tells Annie that she has a call, and it's the woman who found the horse. Her name is Liz, and she's played by Jerry Jones. Liz tells Annie that she needs to put the horse down, but Annie protests, saying that it's Grace's horse and that she needs to decide herself. She tells her not to put the horse down, and then she goes to Robert and tells him what happened, and she hugs him, and she insists that she has to tell Grace what happened to the horse. In the city, a car drives up to a building, and the family gets out of the car. Grace has a prosthetic leg now and crutches. Inside, they're having dinner and making small talk, and then Grace says he's not hungry and leaves the table, but as she goes to get up, she struggles a bit, and her dad rushes to help her, but she says that she doesn't need the help. In the bathroom, Annie tells Robert that he needs to stop trying to help Grace at every given moment. I have to say that Annie is right in this situation, although it may be more complicated than that. In my experience, the rule of thumb is that if you think a disabled person made it help, then ask them. If they say no, then let them get on with whatever they're doing. Being aware that a disabled person may be in need of help is generally a good thing, and it shows compassion. However, if you assume that a disabled person can't do something before they've even tried, and you go to help them, then that is wrong. Considering Grace is still figuring things out, stepping back and letting her learn how to cope will be much better, because along the way she may lose her independence if she feels that she has to rely on other people to get through life. And then we see at school, Grace is coming along and she's trying to get up some stone steps, and she's struggling a little bit. At the office, Annie is still concerned about the article, but she gets a call from school and she goes there and finds Grace crying outside. Grace says she doesn't want to go to school, and Annie gives her some tough love and says that she's not staying at home. However, at home, Grace is then lying in bed watching a video of her horse riding, and she starts crying. She goes in to see her parents and tells them that she wants to see her horse. At the stables, it's raining hard, and they're greeted by Liz. Grace wonders why her horse isn't with the other horses, and Liz tells her that the horse has been the same after the accident. She insists on seeing the horse and wants her to open the enclosure. She approaches the horse, but the horse gets anxious, and Grace sees the wound on its face, and she gets frightened and taken away by Robert. Liz asks Annie if they can put the horse down, and she says no. At the office, Annie searches through some articles on horses online, and researches in books as well, finding an ancient painting about horses, and in a voiceover she talks about the history of horses and their relationship with humans. And she talks about certain people who could connect with horses and get through to them, and they're called whisperers. And she finds an article about a man, and he will be somewhat familiar to a lot of the audience. She gives him a call and asks him about Grace's horse, but he says that she misunderstood what he does. She says that he can come to see them and she'll pay for the fight, but he refuses and hangs up the phone. This man's name is Tom, and he's played by the legendary Robert Redford. At home, Annie comes to see Grace, and she's sitting in the dark by herself. She asks if she's alright, and Grace says that she thinks that they should put her horse down as well as herself, as she feels useless. Grace notices a fax coming through and says that she thinks that a mum would rather work. Robert comes home and he suggests that they go on holiday. Annie says that she thinks Grace would feel self-conscious about wearing sub-dresses, so someone like Barbados was out. She says she wants to go and see Tom, and they argue about it. Robert thinks that they should trust the doctors, but Annie thinks that going to see Tom with Grace would be the right thing to do. Grace comes in and tells them that she doesn't want to go. However, at the stables, there's a man who's trying to calm down the horse, and eventually puts it into the horse box. And as they head out, Annie asks Grace if she wants to put her music on the car cassette player. Ooh, late 90s, that's nostalgia. But Grace ignores her. The horse is rattling the horse box behind them all the way. They get to the Little Bighorn, and Annie asks Grace if she wants to stop off there, and Grace says that she doesn't care. They drive to the gate, and it's closed anyway, and they argue. Grace says that she thinks that Annie is doing all this for herself and doesn't even think about her, although Annie says that she's only doing it for her daughter. Annie then goes to the gate, and the pressure of everything that's been happening in the past couple of days overwhelms her, and she breaks down crying. But Alva then she gets back into the car and head off again as the radio's talking about the changing weather. They get to a crossroads and they're lost. Grace makes fun of her mum for them getting lost, but then they eventually find a motel. Annie comes back and sees Grace trying to practice balancing on a box next to a chair as she looks through the window. They drive to a place they need to be, and Tom is with a man and a little boy, and it turns out the little boy is his nephew and the man is his brother, and he's called Frank. He's played by Chris Cooper. Annie's car drives up and she asks for Tom, and she tells him all about the situation and they need help. She's very insistent and doesn't seem to be giving him much of a choice, and she tells him where they're staying and she drives off. At the motel, there's a knock on the door and Grace calls for her mum to answer it. But then Grace goes to the door and lets Tom in. He notices Grace's leg and he starts to make small talk with her, although Grace doesn't answer. Annie's on the phone in the other room and Tom asks if she's going to take long. Grace says she's always on the phone and she works a lot. But then Annie comes out and asks Grace if she wants to go with them. She says she doesn't, but they all end up leaving the motel room. At the stable, Tom approaches the horse and it rears up, panicking. He then opens the door and goes inside, but the horse runs past him and goes outside. And then it stops, and they sort of eye each other up a bit, and the horse seems to calm down. Tom then throws a stone at the horse's feet, and it makes a little noise, but he calms it down, and they come out to talk to Annie. She says that he's the closest anybody has ever come to the horse, and Tom says that Grace does have to help him with the horse, because he always works with the owner. Annie says that might be complicated, and Grace isn't so sure, but Tom walks away. But then Grace shouts to him, asking what she needs to do. At home, Tom's sister-in-law and Frank are talking about the situation. After dinner, his sister-in-law is guarding them cookies that she's baked, but Tom takes one anyway and goes upstairs. Tom's sister-in-law is called Diane, and she's played by Diane Wiest. The next outside, Tom goes to the horse again, and it's rearing up and causing a fuss as he just watches it. On one side displays of him working with the horse, watching it run around and going out into the lake. Annie asks what they're doing, and she gets a phone call, and as the phone rings, the horse starts panicking, getting worse than it has done before. Tom lets it off the rope and it runs away, and he says to let it go. In the field, Tom approaches the horse as his nephew and Grace watch. His nephew asks Grace if her leg hurts, and she says it only hurts when she kicks somebody. They talk about school, and he says that they get out early so that they can help with the ranch. And Annie comes out to watch and asks if they're in the way and if they should leave. And then Tom just sits there watching the horse, and it goes on for hours, it seems, and it's starting to get dark. Annie and Grace are watching from their car as the horse comes closer to Tom, and Tom gets a hold of the reins and takes him in, telling Annie to leave her phone at home next time. At Tom's place, they're sitting down for dinner, and Frank says, Grace, the prayer, not the little girl. And they start to eat. Annie starts talking about steaks and how little she knew about cows and farming. Frank suggests that they stay somewhere closer to the motel because they'll be working a lot with the horse, and asks Tom permission, and he says, it'll be alright. And his nephew starts asking about Grace's dad, and Annie says that he's at home working. Back at the motel, Robert calls, and Annie says that Grace is feeling a little better. Robert says that he misses Annie, and that then they end the call. Grace asks if her dad is coming, and they start to pack up to get ready to stay in the house near the ranch. Grace and Annie then go to see the horse, Annie gets up on the wooden log to get closer, and Grace tries, but she struggles a bit, so she decides to get a better view from somewhere else. Tom arrives and is given a rope as he puts on some gloves. He lassos the horse and it rears up, but he keeps hold of the rope and it settles, coming to face Tom. A montage then plays with the cows and the horses, and Tom rides around the area. Tom and Frank are riding home with the cattle, and the montage continues doing various things around the ranch. Yeah, and then they're even branding the cows, and Grace is looking at it and sort of winces when that happens. Grace and Annie join in, though, and they're helping out with the ranch, and Tom approaches Grace and saying it's about time that she earned her keep, telling her that there are definitely a list of jobs that she could do. Tom's mum is talking to Annie and asking her about her life, and she talks about how her father died when she was young. Tom's mum says that she thinks that people still carry a lot of grief after a long time after people die. And in her wisdom, Tom's mother has touched upon something that is important to the film and the theme surrounding it. Something which perhaps the film forgets once the romance starts. Whether it's losing a loved one or being diagnosed with a disability, there is surely going to be some level of grieving process. I'm not saying this applies for when a disabled child is born, because that is how they are and they haven't ever known anything different. What I'm saying is that disability can happen to anyone at any time, and so having such a shift in what a person may be used to could really affect somebody's mental health. It doesn't help that the world around us is giving us the idea that disability is wrong. So if a person becomes disabled, then they may find that sense of stigma and even shame for what their life has become. Growing up disabled isn't that much fun either, especially if you're the only disabled person in your school. I should know. You're treated differently by those who don't understand what you're going through, and if you're the only one you can relate to, then you may think that it's all your fault. However, finding the right people who can treat you as a person, not just as a disability, is certainly possible and can make the world a difference. Not to mention finding other disabled people who can talk to you and relate to what you're doing and help you grow as a person and learn to understand that life isn't so bad being disabled. Inside, Annie's talking to Diane, and she says that Tom's always felt close to horses, like they were protecting him. And Grace and Tom's nephew are sitting by the lake in the next scene, and she asks him why he always wears that hat, and he says it's because it fits his head. And then he asks her if she wants to try it on. And I mean, it's cute. It's not a romantic thing at all because they're tiny children, but it's really cute little back and forth between them. And he comes to see Tom in the next scene, and he notices her leg jiggling. And he laughs, saying that she can never sit still. She asks him if he misses the rest of the world, and he asks her what he's missing. He says he was married, though, before, to a woman from Chicago while he was studying engineering, and Annie's surprised. He talks about how they met, and she was a cellist, and they fell in love because it was the most beautiful music he'd ever heard. And then it's sort of implied that Tom thinks that Annie has widely underestimated him. Tom is then on another horse, and Annie comes along, and she strokes the horse, saying that how beautiful it is. And Tom asks her why she doesn't ride anymore, and she says that she just hasn't had the time. Tom comes to the stable where Grace is working, and he asks her to go for a ride with him. They go to his car, and he asks her if she can drive. She's hesitant, but Tom insists that she gets in the driver's seat, and he tells her how to start the car and get driving. She's worried about the pedals, though, because of her prosthetic leg, but he says that she won't know what will happen until she tries. They slowly move down the road, and he puts his hat down over his eyes, telling her to keep going until they get to the end of the road. He's very much like in the way like the horse. He's trusting her to do the right thing. And then they stop the car in a field, and Grace asks Tom if he's afraid of anything, and he says the only thing he's afraid of is growing old. He says that he needs to figure out what's going on in the horse's head and would like it if Grace would tell him about the accident, but he understands if she's not ready. Tom then goes to see Grace, and he's on a horse, and he has a horse with him as well, and he suggests that they both go riding. She says no at first, but he convinces her, and they end up riding out into a field. Annie starts to really enjoy it as well, and it starts to get cloudy, and they stop by a cliff edge, watching the storm in the distance. She says that she envies Tom's mother, because she's at the age where she doesn't have to make any guesses about life, and she hasn't got all the responsibilities as well. Tom says that she doesn't have to wait until she gets to that age, and she thanks Tom for helping them, and she starts asking about his wife again. He talks about her red hair and her green eyes, and she says that she wasn't happy out there, and that it wasn't meant to be. And she wonders if people love the person they're with because they're the right one for them. And Tom says that he didn't love his wife because it was right. He just loved her. They get back on their horses and they go home, and Grace watches from the stables as Tom comes back. The next day, Grace comes to Tom's nephew and asks if she can ride a horse. He helps her get in the stirrups, and he catches his two little brothers who are twins, and as they run off, he shouts at them, making sure that they don't say anything. And later at home, the twins are looking through one of Annie's magazines and looking at all the scantily clad women, and Grace comes in. It's very cute. The little twins, this is a lovely little addition. It's very funny. She asks Annie if she wants a hand, and Tom comes in and he does the same. And then they all sit down for dinner, and Diane asks for the recipe for what Annie's cooked, and Grace says that it was just from a jar, and Annie laughs, embarrassed. Then the boys are arguing over a laptop, and it seems to get physical. The parents stop them, and Annie asks Sob's nephew if Grace tried to ride a horse, and he says that she should ask Grace about that and apologises if he's done anything wrong. And Annie goes to see Grace in their bedroom, and she's being defensive. And Grace says that Annie only pushes her because she wants to be the perfect mother and doesn't even think about her. But Annie says that she only does that so that Grace will know what decisions to make in future. And Grace starts crying, thinking about the accident, and they hug as Annie comforts her. The next day, Tom is sitting with a horse, and it goes up to him, and he gets his rope ready, and Grace watches. Inside, Annie gets a call on the house. At the stables, Grace takes some grain in her hand and hangs up her crutches and walks closer to the horse. At home, Grace is in the kitchen with Tom, and she breaks down and talking about the accident and how it felt like it was her fault. Tom listens, and when she's finished, he tells her that she didn't do anything wrong, and it doesn't make sense to dwell on why things happened. He talks about somebody else who had an accident, and that his spirit seemed to leave him. And she says she knows where that spirit goes. And he says he knows how she must be feeling, saying that she should do anything she can to stop herself from getting lost like that. It's arguably the best scene in the film. Scarlett Johansson was really young at the time and just really showed what a great actress she is going to be. And yes, anger is something that comes along with grief, and maybe a lot of why Grace has acted out against her mother. Not just because she thought her mother worked too much and ignored her, which isn't entirely wrong. Having anxiety can be a tough thing to go through though, and having people to help you understand your responses to your daily problems can certainly help. But Grace has been left alone and had all this bottled up inside of her since the accident, and it feels like nobody else can understand what she was going through. But I believe this is all going to go a long way to help understanding disabled people in general, and dispel the cliche of the angry disabled person. Every person deals with life differently. Some hide away, some confront life head on and don't look back, and some people rage against the world for a situation that's out of their control. Disabled people can find life hard in many ways, finding employment when a person's disability doesn't matter to an employer, finding people who accept you for who you are, and even finding a lasting relationship where disability doesn't get in the way is a challenge. That's not to say that disabled people have to constantly seek the approval of non-disabled people, though. But when the doors are left shut, left, right and centre, it can certainly feel frustrating. So if you meet a disabled person who isn't having the greatest of days, then consider what they may have got them to feeling like that. And don't tar everyone with the same brush. A montage then plays of Tom and Annie out on their horses, guiding the cattle back home, and Diane watches Tom and Annie getting closer, and she looks a little concerned. At the river, Annie is talking with Diane, and Diane implies that Annie is getting herself carried away with things and not thinking about things properly until she wants to go home. Annie asks about whether Tom had girlfriends after his divorce, and Diane tells Annie that she shouldn't put Tom through the heartbreak that he'd suffered before. At a campfire, somebody's singing as Grace smiles. Later on, Annie can't get to sleep, so she goes to see Tom, and they kiss. And the next day, they're riding home, having a good time, as Grace rides home in the car with Frank and his son. And they get home, and Grace notices her dad's car, and so she shouts for him. And Robert greets all of them, and then later on they're all sitting on the porch outside talking, and Grace starts talking about how her mum and her dad met. And Robert finishes the story as Tom and Annie are exchanging glasses. Inside, Annie is putting her things away, and Robert comes in. She looks nervous as he embraces her, but Robert says that it was the right thing to bring Grace, after all. Although, I don't think either of them had an idea what was going to happen. And in his room, Tom is contemplating putting on a record, but he ends up sitting down and just thinking about the whole situation. The next day, Grace and Annie are watching as Robert and Tom go to the stable. Robert says the horse is like a different horse now, and he thanks Tom for his work. And at a barn dance, people are having a great time, they're all dancing, and then a slow song starts playing, and Tom and Annie come together and they start to dance. It's clear they still have some kind of feeling for each other, and Robert watches as they both go to sit down separately. But then in the next scene, Annie goes to confront Tom as she doesn't want them to keep avoiding each other. He says he belongs there, and says that he doesn't think that she wants his life. She says she does, but Tom asks if she can tell her family about her decision, and she says it's not that simple. He says it is, but it's also not fair. Tom then goes to see the horse, and says that there's something they need to do. Outside, he's putting a saddle on the horse, and he takes Grace to see it. She stands and watches as he gives her the reins, but the horse gets a little nervous. He puts on a rope around one of its legs though, and Grace is a bit nervous. Obviously she's seeing the parallel between herself and the horse, and she wants to know if it's going to hurt him, and Tom says it won't. Tom then leads the horse around on 3 feet and pulls it to the ground as Grace shouts for him to stop. He lets it go and makes it run around again, and then he does the same thing as it lays on the floor. Tom then calls Grace over and says that she needs to help him. She's nervous at first, but she sits on the horse and strokes him as Tom tells her to, and the horse is laying there breathing slowly, feeling very calm. Tom then takes the rope off the horse's leg, and he helps Grace to get on the horse's back, getting into the saddle as it slowly stands up. The horse starts walking slowly and then a little faster as Grace starts to smile. Robert and Annie hold hands as they watch. Grace then eventually stops as Tom helps her down, and she hugs him. And she goes to hug her mum, and Annie looks at Tom with a little bit of regret on her face. Then they all go and leave Tom alone. Annie comes back and asks where Tom is, and she's told that he's gone out to take the cattle back. And she asks when he'll be back, and she's told that the person doesn't know. Back at the motel, Robert says that he thinks Annie should take some time to think about what she wants to do next. He talks about the horse and says that he feels like it was him instead, saying how much he appreciates being with her, and that he knows that she doesn't know how he feels about him. And she hugs and sheds a tear. And she hugs him and sheds a tear. Outside, they're loading up the car, and Diane shakes Annie's hand, and Grace and Annie hug as Robert and Grace get into the car and leave Annie so she can think about what she wants. In the house, Annie looks around at all the pictures. She then goes to the stable and looks at the horse. While sitting there, Tom arrives and he asks her where she's going, and he says he was hoping to see her before she had to go, and she cries and she hugs him, asking if they can go for one more ride. She gets in the car though, with the horse box attached to the back, and Tom realises what he should do. Annie is seen crying in the car, holding on to a little bit of rope as a reminder of Tom, and she leaves. And Tom watches on a horse on top of a hill as Annie's car drives off, and the camera pans back to the amazing landscape. Okay, so that's the film, and up next I'll be talking about my general feelings on the film and what I think it means for a non-disabled audience. The Horse Whisperer is a charming romantic drama that easily weaves its themes in and out of the story while the romance starts to blossom. Perhaps the best thing that could be said about The Horse Whisperer, though, is that it's a fantastic looking film. The landscapes take the audience away to a part of the world that they may have never seen before, and the film takes full advantage of that. However, if the sweeping shots of the Montana landscapes were taken away, it could perhaps cut about half an hour from the film. All the cast do well, with Kristen Scott Thomas yet again proving her status as a classic leading lady, although her pairing with Robert Redford takes a little leap of imagination. After all, no amount of focus could disguise their 24-year age gap. However, it's Scarlett Johansson who really comes forward in the film and proves herself as a great screen presence and wonderful performer. However, if the audience is hoping that the film will centre on a young girl learning to come to terms with a new disability, then they will be sorely disappointed. Grace's story is all but sidelined in favour of her horse, and although there's supposed to be some kind of parallel between her and the horse, it's never really properly fleshed out. Not to mention how her entire story of recovery is dependent on a man who has no experience of disability, other than observing somebody who fell into a deep depression. Not to mention the fact that the only way her story could ever possibly finish is when she learns to walk without crutches, suggesting to the audience that when her disability is rendered invisible, then the mental health issues will surely disappear as well. Okay, so the first thing I can tell you is that the film was filmed in the same area as another Robert Redford movie, A River Runs Through It. It's up the Boulder Valley, south of a small Montana town called Big Timber. Robert Redford acquired the screen rights to Nicholas Evans' book even before the novel was published as well. This was the first movie directed by Robert Redford in which he appeared on screen. However, he previously served as the narrator in A River Runs Through It. Robert Redford also broke a toe in filming when a horse stepped on it. Sam Neill trod on his foot shortly afterwards, and the two had a falling out that slowed filming for 2 months, which might suggest why Sam Neill it really isn't in it much, although I don't know. Listed in the closing credits as equine technical advisor is a man called Buck Bannerman. He's the subject of a documentary called Buck in 2011, which relates to his own troubled past and how he became a horse whisperer. In this movie, there's a picture of Buck and his brother Smokey Brannigan in the montage of old family photos during a scene at the Booker home. It's the one with the 2 young boys with Santa Claus. Buck is the boy on the left. This is also the theatrical movie debut of Kate Bosworth. She was chosen as they required an experienced horse rider for the role. This was Jeanette Nolan's final theatrical movie before her death on June 5th, 1998. She played Robert Redford's mother, and she died at the age of 86. And she only died 3 weeks after this movie was released. Her late son, Tim McIntyre, had also starred with Robert Redford in Brubaker from 1980. Although Scarlett Johansson got an introducing credit on the movie, it was actually her 7th role in a feature film. John Barry's original score for the movie was rejected. It ultimately became his concept album, The Beyondness of Things. Natalie Portman withdrew from the starring role in this movie to appear in the Diary of Anne Frank on Broadway instead. Horse whispering, which is something of a misnomer. Horse whispering is something of a misnomer. Native Americans would sometimes tame a horse by jumping on its back and biting its ear to make it stop bucking. And the pain would be worse than if the rider's teeth were jerked by the horse's head. And some observers misunderstood what was happening and assumed that the rider was whispering in the horse's ear to calm it. In the early scenes in New York City, this movie is presented in a standard 1.85:1 aspect ratio. As the location shifts to Montana, the movie widens the viewing area to 2.35:1 aspect ratio. Scenes filmed with actress and singer Betty Buckley were ultimately cut from the movie as well. Emma Thompson was originally tipped for the female lead, and Sharon Stone also wanted the part of Annie McLean. In the book, Pilgrim is dark grey rather than a chestnut, and a Morgan horse, and Gulliver, who is Judith's horse, is a chestnut. After a little run through it, this is the second movie directed by Robert Redford that was set in Montana, and where one of the main characters has the surname McLean. However, this is purely coincidental, as the characters are derived from novels that were written by 2 different authors 19 years apart. The cast includes 3 Oscar winners, Robert Redford, Diane Wiest, and Chris Cooper, and 3 Oscar nominees, Alison Mora, Kristen Scott Thomas, and Scarlett Johansson. Also, Lucas Black had a role in this movie, as they wanted him to change his accent. Kristen Scott Thomas and Scarlett Johansson have also appeared as mother and daughter in The Other Berlin Girl from 2008 and My Mother's Wedding from 2023. This is one of the 3 movies in which Sam Neill appears that is related to Montana. In The Hunt for Red October, his character reveals his dreams to see Montana, and in Jurassic Park, he is working in a dinosaur excavation in the States at the beginning of the movie. All Sam Neill's Montana films also have a connection to the film A Bridge Too Far. In this film and The Hunt for Red October, he works with Sean Connery and Robert Redford, who appeared together in that film. It's directed by Richard Attenborough, who also appeared in Jurassic Park. And finally, Sam Neill and Chris Cooper have both played Sheriff Alvin Dewey. Neill played the part in Cold Blood, and Cooper in Capote. And that's it for this week. Next week I'll be talking about The Pride of the Yankees, a classic Hollywood biopic about Lou Gehrig, a baseball player who had to retire from the game after being diagnosed with ALS. If you'd like to contact me, you can do so via Bluesky at bluesky.com/film-ability. You can also email me at film-ability@outlook.com. And if you'd like to make a contribution to the things that I do here, you can find me at Patreon at patreon.com/film-ability. You can also find my book at Amazon on Kindle and paperback called Film Ability, A History of Disability in Cinema. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.